In this case study, we create a cash flow plan for a slate. In our previous case studies, we have analyzed film slates across various budget ranges, various genres, different kinds of recoupment corridors and waterfalls. And here I would like us to focus on the timing of payments as they go in and out. So I would like us to look at the revenue components and when we can register certain distribution revenues to come in. Now, this is a span over 2 years that I'm going to walk you through, and it is very much, of course, subject to the project, the buyers, the distributors. So this is an average of what I have found to be applicable for most of my films. So I'm sharing this with you here, but it could be very different for your project. So I just want you to have this disclaimer. So we're looking at 4 films in our slate, and we're looking at what funds are coming in at what time. So the first money that comes in is going to be on closing. We're registering 35% of international distribution revenues to come in at closing. And then 6 to 9 months after the closing, I would like to register the revenues coming in from the US sale, which is usually something that happens during that time because that's when the film is finished and screened, and that's when usually US rights are being sold. And then 6 to 9 months after delivery is now when I'm registering the next 25% of international revenues to come in. And then 9 to 12 months after delivery, we are looking at another 30% of international revenues to come in. And then 12 to 24 months after delivery, we're looking at the last 10%. So when we look at the ranges here, we can really say on closing, you normally are going to find your pre-sales and some of your gap loan components here, but you have to run them against obviously your distribution revenues because that's what they are a part of. So the pre-sales are not just standing on their own, they are a part of the revenues we're generating with the film. So about a third on closing, normally it's between 30 and 40%, sometimes even 50%, can be registered. So in my example here, I'm just going to stick with 35%. Now in the next 3 to 6 months after closing, you obviously get your pre-sales paid, and then here I'm going to register the US. Now what we find here often is that this is the time where the delivery payments are made, so we're using that, but I'm using that for my closing component, and I will focus on the US here, and I am going to allow that 100% of the US is going to be generated during that period. The unsold rights of between 15 to 35% are normally generated in the time frame of 3 to 9 months after the delivery. I have now for us here assumed it's 25%. 9 to 12 months after delivery, the range that you can expect is between 35 to 60% of the international distribution revenues. I am applying a 30% component here, so I'm being a little conservative. And then 12 to 24 months is the balance of the unsold rights or whatever can be sold at that point that is being sold. Now I will run my cash flow obviously in connection with the fees that are due for the US and the international market, because those will be deducted and will be applicable when we look at the cash flow. So the revenues will show the revenues that we're generating from the US and international, and it will also show the fees, and the cash flow plan will be showing us the revenues net of fees. So let's take a look at that. Now, before we do that, actually, I'm going to talk about the projects and the assumption with the project. So I kept it very simple here. And the assumption sheet, again, that you're going to see on the Excel can be changed in any which way. And it will automatically flow through the Excel sheet that is on the next sheet. So if you change these assumptions, you can change the budget, you can change the equity, you can change the incentive amount, the loan amounts, you can change the US revenues, the international revenues, you can change the fees, you can change the interest, you can change the management fees, and you can change the profit participation. You can change each of those components depending on how you want to run your slate. For us here, as this is an example, I want to keep it straightforward. because it really is about the mechanism of the cash flow, not about these assumptions, which you can, as I said, change as you want. Now, for this first movie, the production will be starting on January 1st, and the movie will be delivered on June 1st. So that's our production time frame. The budget is $12 million. The way the movie is financed is it's going to be financed 30% with equity, 20% with incentives, 35% with pre-sales, and 15% with gap loan. That's the financing components. Our revenue components consist of 35% coming from the US, 5% fees being deducted, 75% coming from the international market, 7.5% fees deducted. The bank will charge us an interest of 15% for the loan. It's a one-year term, and our management fees are 2.5%, 25, that'd be great, 2.5% of the capital raise, so that's the equity, and 5% of the net profits. We will then share with the equity lenders or with the equity investors our profit 50-50. The same assumptions will apply for film 2. The production starts later. We're starting in March. We're delivering in May. This is a lower budget movie, doesn't take as long. Sorry. And so all the ranges are the same. And again, we can change this if we want to, but everything else is the same. The profit participation, by the way, is 50%. I kept it higher because I'd like to see my ROI in the 120s. So that's why I keep the profit participation as an easy shift to move around. So if my profit is higher, the ROI is higher, then I can drop the equity profit participation for the investor. But if it's not getting what I wanted to get, then I keep it at 50%. Film 3 has all the same components. The budget is different. Obviously, this is a $5 million movie. We are starting production on May 1st. We're delivering the movie on August 1st. So we need to keep those dates in mind because our cash flow is impacted by that. Everything else in regards to the finance plan and the distribution components are the same than with the other films. And I kind of kept the financing and distribution components the same because I don't want you to focus on that. I want you to focus on the timing of when the monies are coming in, which we'll do in a moment. This movie, again, timing-wise, produced on July 1st, delivered on December 1st, and is a budget of $12 million. So in this first example here, we're basically just doing our finance components. We are registering every film 1, 2, 3, and 4, and their budgets. Film 1 is 10 million, film 2 is 3 million, film 3 is 5 million, film 4 is 12 million, and we're registering the production periods. Film 1 is produced from January to June, film 2 is produced from March to May, film 3 is produced from May to August, and film 4 is produced from July to December. And so the financing components are here shared with the incentive, the pre-sale loan, the gap loan, the equity, and then the amount we have to recoup, which is the loan and the equity. So our $10 million movie has $2 million in incentives, a pre-sale loan of $3.5 million, a gap loan of $1.5 million, and equity of $3 million. It has to recoup the equity, the gap loan, and the pre-sale loan, which comes to $8 million. Film 2 has equity of $600,000, budget is $3 million, pre-sale loan of $1,050,000, a gap loan of $450,000. The equity is $900,000, and we're recouping the equity, the gap loan, and the pre-sale loan, which altogether come to $2.4 million. Film 3 is a $5 million movie. Incentive is $1 million. Pre-sale loan is $1,750,000. The gap loan is $750,000, and the equity is $1,500,000. And we have to recoup for the budget coverage $4 million. And the last movie, the incentive is $2.4 million because the movie is $12 million. The pre-sale loan is $4,200,000, the gap loan is $1,800,000, and the equity is $3,600,000. So we need to recoup $9,600,000 for this film. So altogether, our production volume is $30 million because that's what the 4 films will cost. That's the entire production. The incentive in connection with these 4 films that we do not have to repay but are including in our finance plan is $6 million. The loan that we have to do here is $3 million, $10.5 million for the pre-sale loan, $4.5 million for the gap loan, so it's $15 million that we have to recoup for the slate. And the equity to generate this slate will be $9 million, and that will be the amount we are raising. We are recouping then from revenues $24 million. In the next step, we are establishing our distribution revenues for each film. Film 1 generates $3.5 million from the US, and the distribution fees of $175,000 are deducted, giving us a net revenue for the US of $3,325,000. The international revenues for Film 1 are generating $7.5 million. The fees of $563,000 are deducted, leaving us with a net international revenue component of $6,938,000. Gross revenues for the film worldwide are $11 million. The adjusted gross revenues after distribution fees are $10,263,000. We then have to pay the gap loan and the equity. We're paying $8 million in this scenario here. The net revenues are therefore, if you just look basically on the distribution schedule here, the net revenues are $2,263,000, and the ROI for the project is 75%. So in this overall structure, it's really just about the basic terms. We have not even included here the premium for the equity, which will come later, and we'll see that in a moment. So I want you to see here what is being generated just from distribution, what do we have to deduct on the first line of defense, so to speak, and what net revenues will we then establishing. So for film 2, we have $1,050,000 from the US, net $989,000 after the distribution fee was deducted. International is $2,250,000, and net after fees $2,081,000. The net adjusted gross for that film is $3,079,000, and we're recouping the 2.4 for the equity and the loan, not the premium yet, and generating $679,000. The film 3 is US of $1,750,000, net $1,663,000. The international is net $3,469,000, getting us a net adjusted gross of $5,131,000. We are recouping $4 million here, and the net revenues is $1,131,000. And the last film generates a net US revenue of $3,990,000, net international revenue of $8,325,000, and net adjusted gross of $12,315,000, leaving us with net revenues of $2,715,000. So looking at all of this, we're summarizing this, we get $10,050,000 from the US, net $9,975,000. We get $22,500,000 from the international sources, net $20,813,000. So altogether, we have to recoup $24,000 just on the surface, and then we're generating $6,788,000. Now we're going to deal, as I mentioned, we're going to deal with the equity and the premium at the time we're issuing the premium in the waterfall. And this will be part of our cash flow plan and the summary that we're going to look at next. So when we're looking at our, where we had our distribution cash flow sheet, we would apply that here first as an in-between step before generating the detailed month-to-month cash flow plan, because we want to see what comes in where and at what time. So we are allocating that for each and every film in connection with the cash flow plan that we have earlier described. So for film 1, a $3 million movie, the closing is on January 1st. And at that time, we will generate $2,428,000 from international distribution revenues. 6 to 9 months after the closing, and I actually made it 6 months in our cash flow plan, we will get the US revenues of $3,325,000. You can see these are net numbers because we will allow fees to be deducted first. So we are actually dealing with net numbers here in our cash flow plan. 6 to 9 months after delivery, we are generating international distribution revenues, and in this case I made it 6 months just to be clear, so that we have the cash flow plan a little spread over 2 years and not go too far. And then the 9 to 12 months after that will generate international revenues of $2,081,000, and the last portion of the international revenues will be given to us a year later. So we have here altogether our distribution revenues of $10,263,000 for this film, spread out basically over 24 months. And that's what we're seeing for each of the films. We're spreading them out. The next film will start production on March 1st, which we'll later on see when we see the month-to-month schedule, that we're actually releasing our equity on that day, on March 1st. And then we're going straight to the closing, where we're generating 35% of distribution revenues within the pre-sales that are being paid for. In the next 6 to 9 months, we're generating the US of $998,000. After that, we're generating more money from the international market, $520,000, and then 9 to 12 months after delivery, again we're getting $624,000 from international, and then 12 to 24 months we're generating the balance of $208,000. So our $3,079,000 again here is spread over a time frame of 24 months. The same for film 3. We have our closing, we have our 6 to 9 months after closing, we have our 6 to 9 months after delivery, we have our 6 to 12 months after delivery, 9 to 12 months after delivery, and we have our 12 to 24 months after delivery payments for US and international revenues for film 3 and film 4. So altogether here, during the closing phase, we are generating revenues altogether of $7,284,000, and then after that we have the domestic come in at $9,975,000. Then we have international come in at $5,203,000 in the 6 to 9 months after delivery. 9 to 12 months after delivery, we are generating $6,244,000, and 12 to 25 months after delivery of the films, we are generating $2,081,000. So our $30,788,000 revenues are spread over here in connection with the 4 films, their production schedules, and the installment payments, and generating of revenue components over the 2 months is reflected here. Now we're going to look at the month-to-month overview. So the way we structure our cash flow, our yearly cash flow, is month to month. So we have all the months from January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December showing up here for 2025. And we are using those months correctly in connection with when money is coming in and also when money is going out. What I'm focusing on here is when money is going out as from our investment. So the equity component is what we're releasing, because the lending component is not relevant in this cash flow. It's relevant in the next cash flow because our term with the bank is 1 year. So you're going to see that in 2026 for the next year, which is when we pay our loan amounts back. Here we are basically just looking at what are we paying for each film in equity, and what are some of the revenues that are coming in for that time. So for film 1, in January, when the production starts, we have $3 million in equity that we are releasing. And remember that we are getting, on closing, 35% of international revenues. And that's what is listed here with $2,248,000. That seems high. No, it seems not high because it's a 10, I forgot. It's a $10 million movie. We're right on track. I got confused for a moment. So our $10 million movie releases $2,428,000, generates $2,428,000 in the first installment from international distribution rights on closing. So that will be basically our pre-sales. And so then the next installment would be due 6 months after that. And that is our US distribution revenue that's coming in July for film 1. And that is $3,325,000 from the US. And that's the net number from the US, right? So we are using the net number, net of fees. That's important. And then in December, which is another 6 months later, we are looking at 25% of the international revenues per our schedule that we had put together on the first slide. So that is $1,734,000, and that's all we're getting for film 1 during the first year. The balance of all our distribution revenues that are coming in will be in the next year, in 2026. So we'll take a look at that in a moment. So film 2 starts shooting, basically closes on the 1st of March. So the equity we're releasing that day is $600,000. The movie, remember, was $5 million. Yes, correct. It was $5 million. So we are releasing then for the $5 million movie our, I'm just going to fix this real quick. Here we go. We're releasing $600,000 in equity. So then the revenues that we're getting, the first 35% is $728,000 due to us on closing. That is 35% of international. Now, 6 months later, in September, we are getting $998,000 from the US. That is the US distribution revenues. And remember that this movie that is delivering that is basically closing in March and delivering in May is going to get 6 months later after May, after the delivery date, another 25% of international, which is $520,000. And that's why we see that coming in here in November, because the movie delivery date is May, 6 months later is November. So that's now for this movie, we were able to generate 3 worldwide revenue components in revenues. So we are generating for our film 3 $2,246,000, and we generated for our film 1 $7,488,000 in the first year. Now the first film, as you know, the total that the film will generate is $10,263, and in year 1 we have now generated $7,488,000 of that. The film 2 total was $3,079,000, and we have generated in year 1 $2,246,000 of that. So our third film is going to shoot on May 1st. So you see here we're releasing equity of $1.5 million for this $5 million movie, and we're getting 35% of the international as a payment on closing. That is $1,214,000. Nothing else will be generated that year, that first year, because nothing is coming in. So the same for film 4, which shoots July 1st, only gets the first 35% of international, and nothing else is coming in. So when we look at the entire cash flow here, we're seeing in January we are cash flow negative with $572,000. We're running a balance with our investments. So when you see the balance on the bottom here, starting with $9 million, then we're deducting the first monies from that, and that is when we look at January, what's coming in, what's going out. We are running a balance of $8,428,000 still for the year, and then in February nothing is generated, so we're still running a balance of $8,428,000 from the investment that we still have. And then in March we are we are cash flow positive with $128,000, so we're adding that to our balance, so we get $8,575,000 here. Again, that number has to do with the fact that we started with the investment of $9 million, and we are including here in our cash flow plan all the monies we're receiving and all the monies we're spending. So the first total is basically the money that we're looking at in our cash flow plan without the basically being the balance for the equity being run parallel. So this is just where are we when we are paying out equity and making revenues. And the second line, but the balance line, basically runs our $9 million investment parallel to what's going on. This is kind of what do we have left in our money envelope, if you want. So in April, we're not generating anything. So in our money envelope, we still have $8,575,000. We have not spent that much from our equity. In May, we are spending $1,500,000. We are generating $1,214,000. So we are cash flow negative in May at $286,000. This will be deducted then from what's in our money envelope. So we are then in May at $8,271,000. And then in June, we're staying at that number because we're not generating anything in June, and we're also not spending any money in June. In July, we are getting 2 distribution revenues in here for 2 films, and we are spending the equity for one film. So we are cash flow positive with $2,639,000 here, and we're adding that to our money envelope if you want. So we have in our envelope now $10,909,000. In August, nothing is coming in, so we're staying there. We're not spending anything, we're not getting anything. In September, we're adding revenues of $998,000, which gets us to $11,907,000 in our cash flow pocket. Stays that way in October because nothing is spent, nothing came in. And for November, we are generating $520,000 and are cash flow positive in that month. And we are also running parallel our investment here with $12,427,000. And then in December, we are generating $1,734,000 that month, and we are, if we keep the $9 million going, at $14,167,000 here. So if I would take out the $9 million, just so you know, if I will remove them from the balance, just to give you an example, we would basically mirror the cash flow that's available at any given time. So if I look at that, and I just have this in front of me here because I just removed the $9 million on my screen on the Excel here. So if I look at that, I will stay actually cash flow negative until July, because most of the money that comes in is not covering what we have to spend. So we're cash flow negative for the first 6 months. And in July, because we have these 2 large revenue numbers coming in, we are for the first time cash flow positive with $1,900,000, just so you know. And we stay cash flow positive from July on until the end of the year. So this is something that you just keep in mind, because you want to run the cash flow based on what do I have with the investment that I'm given by the investor, but also what would it look like if I'm just dealing with the monies that I get, and how would the monies that I make, how far do they take me, how long am I in the red until the revenues actually get me into a positive cash flow component. And in our case here, with the cash flow structure that we have done, we would actually start looking at a positive cash flow in July. So as I mentioned earlier, if we are removing the balance that we are carrying with the equity from the equation, you see here that we are cash flow negative in January with $572,000, and then we stay cash flow negative until March. Gets a little better. We're then having $443,000 in the negative. We'll then stay negative again, a little more even, $729,000 in May, because we have a large payment with the $1,500,000 that we're taking out for movie number 3. And then we are actually gaining money for the first time. We are cash flow positive in July, and that has to do with 2 large distribution payments that are being made in July in connection with 2 films, Film 1 and Film 4. And that gets us to a positive cash flow for the first time at $1,909,000. We're staying then positive because all we're doing from July on is adding revenues. We're adding revenues in September of 989,000, in November of 520,000, and in December of 1,734,000. So we end up with a positive cash flow of 5,162 is the word I was looking for, in 2025, in our first year with these 4 films. So I'm going to walk you through 2 versions of the second year cash flow plan. For the first version here, I'm going to keep it very clean. I'm just going to look at exactly what happens that year without looking at what happened the year before. It's the year only. So in this year now, in January, we have to pay our first loan back. This is the first loan for our first movie. This is movie 1. But we're also getting revenues for movie 4. So that's why the $5 million that we have to repay as a loan are going to be offset by revenues of $3,990,000. We're still cash flow negative. If I just look at this, in a finite scenario here, we're actually not negative if I'm taking the balance from the last year. But for now, I just want you to look at the year, what the year looks like without any balances coming from anywhere. So this is just a pure thing, what's happening in the year in connection with these 4 movies. So here we are paying back the loan that is basically for the first film. And then in the next thing happens in February. In February, I'm generating 2 distribution revenues coming in for film 2 and film 3 at $1,492,000. This will then also elevate my balance to $482,000 in February. And then in March, I have to pay back another loan for film 2. This is the next loan I'm paying back, $1,500,000. I am also generating revenues in March for film 1. So all of this gets me to a positive cash flow of $581,000 that month. And my balance, meaning my cash envelope, so if you will, shows $1,063,000. So then in April, I'm generating revenues for film 3 of $1,041,000. So that's my positive for that month. And then my envelope, if you want, the cash that I have available, my balance, is $2,103,000 in April. In March, I'm paying a big loan back for our film number 3 of $2,500,000. I'm getting a little money in for film number 2, but I am cash flow negative in May. So $2,292,000 is my cash flow negative month in May, and it also drives me back into the negative for my balance. So in May, all of a sudden, I'm dipping into a red hole. In June, I'm generating revenues for film 1. I'm also generating revenues for film 4. So I'm generating $2,775,000 in revenues, and that gets my balance up in general until that point to $2,587,000. So while we're cash flow negative in May, we're now in June again cash flow positive. In July, I'm paying back a big loan for film 4, and that is $6 million that I'm being dragged down into the red again. So my $2,587,000 cash flow positive June becomes a cash flow negative July with $3,413,000. In August, I'm generating $347,000 in revenues from film number 3, which is the revenue that I'm getting for the month of August, but I'm still cash flow negative at $3,067,000. And then in September, I'm generating revenues for film 4 of $2,498,000, and that will get me that income for September and keeps me a little bit cash flow negative of $569,000 in the month of September still. In October, nothing changes. In November, nothing changes. So I'm still cash flow negative until December, when I'm getting my last payment for film 4 of $833,000. And now I'm cash flow positive at $236,000 for that year. Now, if I carry over the balance I had generated in 2025, so in year 1, that balance was $5,162,000. I will actually stay cash flow positive the entire year because I'm dragging that balance over. And so I'm starting off in January where in my cash envelope, if you want, I have 5,162,000 from the prior year that I've generated. Now I'm paying, as I mentioned before, the loan of 5 million for film 1. I'm generating some revenues for film 4. So altogether, I have revenues in January of 1,010,000, which then, I have a loss in that month of 1,010,000 because I have to pay 5 million in a loan, and I'm only generating in revenues 3,990,000. So that kind of leaves me in the dirt with 1,010,000, but because I have a balance from the year before, my January overall balance is 4,152,000. Now in February, I'm generating revenues of 1,492,000, which increases then my balance, my overall balance that year at 5,643,000 in the month of February. In March, I'm paying again a loan, but I'm also getting some revenues. So the income for March, or basically the balance for March, generated by the revenues I got for film 1 and the loan I have to pay for film 2, is 581,000, and that is added to my balance and gets me to a balance of 6,224,000. And then in April, I'm adding revenues of 1,041,000, which elevates my balance to 7,265,000. In May, I have to pay again a large loan, and so I have a negative there of 2,292,000, but my balance can carry this, leaving me with 4,973,000 in the bank. In June, I get 2 more revenues coming in for film 1 and film 4. So we're making 2,775,000 in June, which elevates my balance in June then to 7,748,000. In July, I have to pay a large loan back of 6 million. So now my balance drops down to 1,748,000. In August, I'm generating revenues of 347,000. So my balance goes up to 2,095,000. In September, I'm adding 2,498,000 to my balance, which then is 4,593,000. And then in December, I'm adding another 833,000 to my balance, and so I'm ending up with 5,425,000 in the end of year 2. So in essence, what we're going to do is basically straightforward and run the balance through. So in year 1, as you remember, we had generated 14,162,000, and that was obviously including the equity. So if we run that through and we're just keeping what we have and we're continuing with what we have, we would then start with a balance of 14,162,000 from year 1, and we would run it through the entire year, which would basically carry us through and keep us cash flow positive through the entire year, with all the various payments we have to make to the bank and to everyone else. So what we have not deducted here is obviously the equity, and that will be happening in the next slide, but I just want you to see how you would run your cash flow and how you would continue to do this. Theoretically, what you could do, and that's something we could think about, is because we're running with a lot of cash, we could add more product and generate more revenues, because we are leveraging our $9 million already in year 1 to become more money, and we could theoretically add product because we have the money to do it. So I'm keeping it here with 4 million because I want you to have a simple analysis first to kind of get your feet wet, so to speak. But what you could do is you could add lines and just add more production and see, how much more can I add and still keep cash flow positive. And that way you can actually optimize your production slate and add product and make a bigger library, because you do have all that money. So, starting in 2025, let me look here, in July, well, you're basically cash flow the entire time because you have the 9 million. So you're not once cash flow negative, because you're not once using up all the equity that you have actually scheduled in your finance plan to use. So if I were to guess, how much money do I actually need, and maybe do it the other way around and saying, well, I'm not going to use all the money to add production. I'm just going to lower my fundraise and see how much money can I get away with raising and still keeping my production going using the cash flow that I have. So I'm going to tell you here as I'm running this. Let me show you something on the next slide, and you'll see what I mean by how much equity do you actually need to run the entire slate, given what is happening here with your cash flow. So let's take a look at all the things we have to pay, all the things we're making. We're making in year one 14,162,000, which does, however, include the equity, which we're going to pay now in a moment. Year two, we're generating 263,000. Does not include the balance forward, so that's just what the year generates without the equity component. And so altogether, we're generating 14,425,000. Now, with my interest having to be paid to the bank of 15% of my loans, that is 2,250,000, and the equity now being repaid at 9 million plus the premium of the equity being repaid at 1.8, I'm left with a net revenue of 1,375,000. The management, us being us, will charge 2.5% management fee on the raise, which is the equity. 2.5% of 9 million is 225,000, and the success fee is 5% of the net revenue, which is 1,375,000. So we are deducting this, leaving us with profit of 1,081,000. Of that, I'm sharing 50% with the equity, so they get a profit participation of 540,000. They also get a premium of 1.8 million, so that leaves them with an ROI of 26% on this slate in 2 years. So what I've done here, I've changed our investment. I basically said, okay, what would happen if I don't have $9 million in equity, but I only have $3 million in equity? Would I be able to stay cash flow positive throughout the year? And would I have enough money to make all these movies happen? And then can I use the revenues that I'm making in order to cover everything, because I'm basically not having another $6 million in equity? And guess what? If the cash flow would operate the way we are projecting it here, all you need is $3 million in equity to run these 4 films, which is pretty amazing. So let's see what year 2 looks like if we're using just $3 million in equity. So in year 2, I'm carrying my balance over from year 1. The balance from year 1 was 8,162,000, so I'm carrying that over. And then in year 2, you see here, even though I have large expenses in February and in May and in July, I'm keeping my cash flow in the positive. So I'm in the green, I'm doing okay. And I'm ending up with 8,425,000 in the end of year 2. Now, excuse me, reducing my equity and using my raise should significantly increase my ROI. So let's see what that looks like. And indeed it does. So in year 1, we're making 8,162,000. In year 2, we're making 263,000. So the numbers haven't changed because we're making the same amount of money with the movies that we're generating. We're just using less money in order to run our cash flow and see how little, I should say, can we get away with in equity to pay for all this, given we're using revenues to support our films and support the production costs. So indeed, with a $3 million investment, the investor makes 1,785,000 net revenues, which is 59.51%. So basically nearly doubling, more than doubling their ROI for due to the reason that we reduced the equity investment. So that's pretty significant. So what you want to do with your cash flow, and you can play around with this form here, you want to see where are you ending up with how much money you need and how much money you can actually use. And do you want to create more product with the money that you have, which is one way of going, keeping the 9 million as a raise and then just adding more product because you have money available to do that. Or B, go for a lower investment and then use the revenues that you're making in order to support the 4 films that you're producing. So those are your 2 options that you can try and see what that does for you with the particular slate you're working on. And the reason why we're doing these cash flow plans is exactly this. We need 2 components here. We want to know how do our films perform, number 1. We want to know when is money to be paid, when is money coming in, number 2. And then we want to have the option to either add product to the library because we are positive cash flow, we are showing positive cash flow, and we do have the money to add more equity to another project. That could be film number 4, film number 5, film number 6, etc. So we could add, or we say we're going to reduce the equity because we want to do the 4 films, but we really don't want to do a $9 million raise. We're just going to do a $3 million raise. So what would that look like? So you can do that, you can run that, and if you want, obviously, again, these revenues, the way they come in, it's very, very, very project specific. So if you want to be safe and you want to give yourself more time with when monies are coming in, just spread them out. Just spread them out wider, add another year, and give yourself a little time as to when you're generating certain revenue. So you can do that. You don't have to run the cash flow like I did. I ran it based on how most of our films generated revenues, but our films might not be like your films. And our films were produced at a certain time where things were a little different. So you might look at this and say, well, I don't know if I can generate that much money in 2 years. Maybe I need another year, and that's perfectly fine and that's perfectly okay. So you can add that, and then you can see what does it do to your equity needs and to your ROI. So if you have any questions, you know where to find me.